What's up, nerds? All right, in this first part of a three-part series, I think, I broke up this part into three parts because this is the data layer integration. There's actually a lot going on, and it would have been one really long video, and I don't think anybody really wants to watch a long video. So this is part A, and what we're going to do is integrate the PostgreSQL Docker image into our existing Docker compose.yaml files, and we're going to link that to the backend Spring Boot service. And so we're going to bring all the different Docker layers that we need, and we're going to get them running. And then in part two, we will actually connect our Spring app to the database so that we can read and write from it. Only a few files today, 6 files. The first one, just the README. You got to update your docs, got to keep them up to date. So that's all we did. I already showed you that. The next part is the env, which is where I am keeping Docker specific information. So if you followed along so far, in my shortcut scripts, I've parameterized a lot of the code so I can programmatically do things. So I had a Spring Docker prefix and an Angular Docker prefix. So I had to create a Postgres Docker prefix so that I could manage the database Docker image programmatically. I needed to give like a default name so we'd know what the database was called, both for the front end and the back end for connection purposes. Needed a root username and a root password, running it locally, and then we needed just image names. So I just created kind of everything I needed for the database and I exported it. And then in another video, I went over some of these Docker shortcut scripts, but I like to create basically bash enums of things I often use. And so in this case, I just add Postgres Docker as a predefined Docker container that we're tracking through things. And you can view this as well. So this is the .env file. Again, it's just exporting a bunch of variables that we use. This has grown over the course of the videos and the courses I've done, but I've just added, a Postgres following that same pattern that I've been adding. So I like to follow patterns, like to keep things consistent so that once you get it once, you can continue to understand. So yeah, that is the env file. I have this script that I updated. So it's return running container ID, and it does exactly what it says it does. So it's a Docker shortcut script, and it will print out the container ID given a partial or complete string, or you give it a preloaded service. And so all I added was that if you add in, that you're looking for the Postgres, it'll automatically give you the Docker container. It's not running right now, but I can demo this. It's in bin, Docker, shortcut scripts, return running container ID. This is the help and everything, and it's not running right now. Docker PS, I don't think. So it wouldn't work, but once it runs, I can kind of show you what I did here. But basically, I have these preloaded Docker services, and we have the Spring backend, the Angular front end, and then the Postgres application app DB. And all I added here was that in the if-else, if you do the Postgres value, if that's a value you pass in, then return the preloaded image container ID. Just some helpful things that I thought I'd go over. So yeah, the real key information here is in the Docker Compose. You remember we have 2 Docker Composes. We have one at the top level of our application. So this one is in charge of, it has the PJL application DB that we added, but it also has the backend server and it has the front end app. So when we run this, it'll start the front end, the back end, and the PJL application DB all on Docker. And so we name the service PJL application DB. We have to pull an image. Like I said, or like it's lit in the comments, I just use the official Postgres image. It's on Docker Hub. Restart always, just in case it goes down. We'll just bring it back up because we always want that daemon running in the background for our backend. Wouldn't work otherwise. We give it a container name, and this is exported from that env that I showed you. So it's just the prefix followed by outer, since this is the outer env. So our Docker compose has that, and then we map our local 5432 port to the one on Docker. This is the default port for Postgres. And then I have to set some environment variables. So the Postgres DB, this is the name, the username, and the password. These are all needed when we set it up. And then I link volumes just in case I need to share data. So it goes your local directory. So if I put something in var temp db data, it'll show up when I start the container in TMP. And I can demo that as well, maybe, if I have anything in var temp db data. Temp db data. All right, so I have a couple of things here. And so when I start the repo, you'll see that those will be, when I start the application, they'll be in TMP. So without further ado, we can do that. Use bin, Docker, startup scripts, and then you run app with Docker. And just as a sanity check, we'll do Docker PS. There's nothing running. So when you run the shortcut script that I have for you, make sure Docker is running, make sure you have Docker installed. But what it's going to do is it's starting everything. So everything in that Docker compose, it's starting right now, the front end, the back end. So if you go Docker PS again, there are actually three things here. If you go to bin, Docker shortcut scripts, and you log in, you can do -t and log into DB. And then you can do, let's see what's in the temp directory. STP. There are those files from my local. So we are in the all right. So we are root inside the DB. If you do pSQL app DB, we are in the application DB. So we have logged into exit again. So basically everything's running, including Postgres. So we can actually stop all this, do stop, F for full stop, Docker PS. All right, everything's gone. So we have looked at this Docker compose. Inside the Spring backend, there's another Docker compose. So on the inner part, Spring backend, you have this Docker compose. It's set up the same, except there's no front end. So if we just want to run the backend and the database to test that without the front end, we can do that. So again, we use that same image. All this stuff is the same. It even links to the same directories. So no real change here. It's just inside the Spring backend directory, and it only has the Spring backend app here, not the front end. And so if we get this one started, you would do Spring backend, go to this bin, go to Docker startup scripts, and then you can run as Docker container. And this is just going to start backend and front end, same as before. Docker PS. So now you have two things running because of when we started it. So yeah, I think that should clear it up. There's an env file in Spring backend. You can see here, Spring backend.env. And we use the same prefix, we just call it inner so that there's no naming conflict. Nothing too crazy there. And then those same, we just update the container name to inner. So yeah, that's it. All we really wanted to do was get our Docker composes up to date, get that database layer in there. Now that we have the database layer and it's running, in part 2, we'll actually mess with the Spring code, the Spring database configuration, so that Spring can connect to that running Docker Postgres, and it can write to it and read from it. Thanks. Hope this was helpful.